Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Front Porch Tailgate. I'm Michael Scott.
And I'm Byron Hazley. Welcome to the 33rd episode of the podcast.
That's right. We have a great show lined up for you guys today. Byron, how are you doing?
Mike, I cannot complain. Things are going well. The weather's starting to turn, all smiles over here. Feeling great. What about you?
You know what, Byron? I am doing absolutely fantastic this week. I've been working hard. I've been playing hard. And it's not, like you said, it's nice to get out there and enjoy some of this beautiful weather that we've been having this past week.
Absolutely. And we're ready to throw out, get this pandemic-proof podcast going. We got another pandemic-proof podcast coming your way. Mike, what do we have on today's show?
Well, we have a few different things, Byron. We're going to talk a little bit about The Last Dance, the Chicago Bulls documentary. Parts 3 and 4 aired this past weekend on ESPN. We're also going to talk about some of the bigger surprises and headlines from the 2020 NFL Draft from this past weekend. And then we also have a special guest making an appearance on the podcast today, a writer from the Detroit News. So we have a lot in store. I'm excited about it. Why don't you say we just dive right in?
Absolutely.
Let's get it going, baby. So, The Last Dance, it's been making headlines. It's already the most watched documentary so far this year with ESPN. And let me tell you, Byron, it's been pretty crazy, some of the stuff that's been coming out of it. Did you get a chance to watch the last episodes this past weekend?
Absolutely, Mike. I recorded them. As you know, you and I were having a conversation during the time of the original airing, but I recorded them and I watched them Monday night. I was all excited for it. Got me through the workday. So, yeah, I watched it. I loved it. A lot of it I knew. A lot of it you were I remember at least hearing about or reading articles, reading clips, seeing clips, watching parts of it from the Bad Boys 30 for 30 themselves. So I think it's great. I thought it was another phenomenal episode, 3 and 4.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I really liked how they dived in and they touched base on Dennis Rodman, the Bad Boys, and their effect, on Michael Jordan and the Bulls. And I got to say, really like the fact that Carmen Electra was in the episode.
Man. Oh, yeah, that was a big surprise, but a pleasant one.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, at 48 years old, she's still a smoke show. Wow.
Baby. Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting touching base on that. It really, transitioning to Dennis Rodman, this guy was essentially a rock star. He had Carmen Electra on the back of his motorcycle. They rode into the middle of the court of the Chicago Bulls practice facility and proceeded to get it on and do the nasty on an off day.
Yeah.
Did you get a chance to see that? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, not really surprised. That was Dennis being Dennis. I mean, the guy married himself, so not really much that you can really think outside of that. Not much is going to surprise you.
Yeah, together, she said the 2-8 popsicles. They got it on in the weight room, on the court, in the locker room, as well as a bunch of other places. And that was just really touching the tip of the iceberg. I thought one of the important things to note that came out of that documentary, it looked as if Michael Jordan had gone to Vegas to chase down Dennis Rodman on his extended in-season vacation and drag him out of the hotel because he never showed back up after 48 hours to the Bulls facilities. Well, the director, Jason M. Heir, came out later and basically said that was a little misconstrued the way it was put together. He had said that Jordan actually got him out of his apartment and that he lived just across the street from the United Center. So Jordan and an athletic trainer went up and banged on Rodman's door, and I guess Michael Jordan then proceeded off camera to grab Rodman by his nose ring and drag him out of his apartment back to practice.
Oh, Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah. He doesn't
And
mess around, man. You can tell
no,
that.
no, obviously Jordan was well focused on winning that sixth NBA championship. And you got to think, if you're Dennis Rodman waking up with a hangover, that just doesn't feel too good.
No, it absolutely can't. But, Dennis is going to be Dennis. So, Dennis the Menace.
Absolutely. And Dennis was a rock star. Don't get me wrong. Another thing that I thought was really interesting throughout parts 3 and 4 was the significance that Isaiah Thomas and the Bad Boys affect, and how it affected the Jordan and the Bulls, essentially, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the major hurdles that they had to get over in order to get to the finals, was getting through the Pistons. As Jordan was coming up, you had Larry Bird aging, and the Pistons kind of got through the Celtics, kind of did away with that dynasty that was going on. And then Jordan had to climb that mountain of getting through the Celtics, then getting through the Pistons in order to make it to his finals and make it known that he's here to take over the league.
Right. And I just thought it was really interesting because it almost, like, for Michael Jordan, this was really something that he dealt with for quite a few years and personally could not get over the hump. And then he finally makes a major breakthrough. And one of the things that was really interesting about the whole thing were the Jordan rules. I know we've heard about all those before, but basically that was a physical style of play that the Pistons intended to put on Jordan to physically oppress him before he would take flight. And I think watching Michael Jordan talk about those teams and talk about Isaiah Thomas, there was obviously some hard feelings there still.
Oh, absolutely. That should be no surprise that they don't really like each other. I know Isaiah, he had come out and said after he was on, I believe, Get Up, and he came out and said he was hoping that the reason why he didn't make the 1992 Olympic team, the Dream Team, the infamous Dream Team, was because of Michael Jordan. He was hopeful that that wasn't the reason why, because that's one of Isaiah Thomas's biggest regrets, is that he wasn't a part of that Dream Team, and he's very sad about it still to this day.
Do you really buy that, though? Do you really believe that the Detroit Pistons and those bad boys turning their noses up at Michael Jordan and the Bulls and all those hard years, do you really think that's the reason Isaiah Thomas wasn't part of the team?
No, I think there had to do more with his gripe with Magic Johnson than with Jordan. And as a matter of fact, there was an article that came out today where the orchestrator of the Dream Team, the guy that put together the roster, he came out and stated that Michael Jordan had nothing to do with it, with Isaiah Thomas not making that team.
Gotcha. Now, it's been almost like 30 years, right? And the Bulls' hatred for those Pistons is still prevalent. I mean, Horace Grant came out during the documentary and basically said that the Detroit Pistons were some straight-up bitches. Michael Jordan said, "I hated them. That hate carries over even to this day." Were you getting that feeling watching the documentary, how deeply that hatred runs and how difficult it was for the Bulls to face off against, the Pistons year in and year out, dealing with that physical abuse?
So I think, Mike, there's more to it than just this episode. Like I said, if you watched the 30 for 30 on the Pistons, you really got a clearer picture of it. And then you jump into this version, so you get to see both sides of it. And it was a mutual disdain for one another. But you could see that there were certain players that left the Pistons actually and joined Jordan and won some championships alongside of him. I.e. Dennis Rodman, John Sally. There were some others that were a part of those 6 championships as well. But needless to say, from an overall standpoint, if you talk to the leader of the team, the leaders, Bill Laimbeer, he still holds a gripe. If you ever ask him if LeBron's better than Michael Jordan, he'll tell you yes 1,000 times over. He gives Michael Jordan zero credit.
Oh, yeah. And that's what I thought was really interesting, Byron, is to see the Bulls actually embrace Rodman because, as you know, during his time with the Bad Boys, he was one of the primary offenders against the Chicago Bulls. I mean, at one point in the documentary, you see him shoving Scottie Pippen after the whistle into the stands where Scottie Pippen's almost injured.
Yeah. I mean, you've got Dennis, that was part of his job, right? He was in there and he was kind of, once that fell apart, the Bad Boys fell apart, he kind of bounced around and people really didn't know what to do with Dennis because he's such a different character. He's a true character and he couldn't really find a niche, and he found himself a home with the Bulls because he was a guy where he could be the third wheel with Michael and Scotty, but try to put him on and be like a primary guy, that's not his thing. So him finding a home with the Pistons, with the Bulls was, a 180 from what you saw from the days after he left the Pistons.
Definitely. I completely agree with you because in between those time periods, he went and played for San Antonio, and he had some, and played for some other teams, and he had some issues where he necessarily wasn't playing his best and wasn't really himself, And I thought what was important to note was Dennis Rodman had a really father-like relationship with Chuck Daly at the time, playing for the Pistons, that really helped guide him and keep him on the straight and narrow and to give him that early success in his career. And that's something he lacked all the way until he linked up with Phil Jackson, who basically put his arm around him and essentially acted as a friend to him more than anything. And I think those are the times when you've seen teams get the best out of Dennis Rodman.
Absolutely. So if you really think about it, Mike, Dennis Rodman was a sheltered person. He wasn't exposed to much, and he got to the NBA and he was just seeing all kinds of stuff. It's almost like that kid you see at college. He finally gets away from his parents and he's over in the corner puking on himself. He just doesn't know how to react. So he needs someone to come put their arm around him and say, hey, man, you take 4 shots instead of 6, buddy. Keep it moving. Keep it together.
You sound like you've done this before.
Well, I've had to coach up 1 or 2 people in my life. I'll say that much.
Charles Barkley came out and was speaking about the Bad Boys on ESPN, and he said that when you'd play them, basically you got to call your family and tell them you love them just in case you never saw them again. Now, hearing that comment, do you think Charles Barkley is overblowing it, the physicality of playing the Bad Boys? What was your opinion on that team and their style of play?
I mean, absolutely. Detroit, they just weren't a team that gave up layups. So if you were a team that was trying to get in the paint, lay up, dunk, they were going to punish you. And they did that. I mean, the team that was just as physical as them, but they didn't fit, the same image as the Bad Boys was the Celtics. The Celtics were known for that. You had James Worthy come out and say that the Celtics were the real Bad Boys. They were the ones that were coming out, hurting people, laying people out. Robert Parrish, Kevin McHale, those guys were just as physical as Rick Mahorn and Bill Laimbeer and Dennis Rodman. So, I mean, they just got somewhat of a bad rep off the rip, so they just owned it and said, yep, we're the Bad Boys.
Well, it's funny that you bring the Celtics up because in 1991, the Pistons snubbed Chicago when Chicago breaks through and sweeps Detroit in the Eastern Conference Finals en route to their first NBA championship. They go on to beat the Lakers. Well, as the game clock expired, Bill Laimbeer, Isaiah Thomas, and a handful of other Pistons leave the court and leave the bench area without actually shaking the Bulls' hands. Jordan was very upset about that, as well as a number of other Bulls. But what people might not know is they wanted to hand the torch essentially to the Bulls the same way it had been handed to the Bad Boys, because those Celtics didn't shake the Detroit Pistons' hands either when they beat them initially.
I think that's bullshit, Mike, to be honest with you. I know that's what Isaiah said on that episode, but in actuality, the day before that game when the Bulls were up 3-0, Michael Jordan came out. He had a press conference in the Pontiac Silverdome, and he told them, the Pistons, they're bad for basketball. They're bad champions. He just completely badmouthed them. And they took that to heart. That was press clippings. They didn't want to shake his hand. They knew it was over and done with.
So you're calling Isaiah Thomas a liar?
Absolutely.
Isaiah Thomas was actually really regretful on the documentary about what had transpired back then. He was on record saying, knowing what we know now in the aftermath of what took place, I think all of us would have stopped and said, hey, congratulations, like they do now. He said we would have did it. Of course we would have done it. Yeah. And for me, really taking a step back and thinking about those comments, I really wasn't buying that either. And the reason was, I feel like Isaiah Thomas's legacy and not being on the dream team, and the fact that in NBA circles he's not spoken of highly like other players in that era, like Magic, Bird, Jordan, Kareem. I think he laments his connection with the Bad Boys and how they carried themselves at that specific time period to the fact that he's not a part of that. And I think that's what he really regrets, is being left out of verbal history, essentially.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Mike.
And I thought it was really interesting, too, because Bill Laimbeer, being typical Bill Laimbeer, was unapologetic. He called the Bulls whiners, and he really showed no empathy for that situation at that point in time. Michael Jordan is somebody who, watching the documentary, it seems like he's still affected by it in this day and age, almost 30 years later. He was on record saying, what Isaiah Thomas says now, it wasn't his true actions then. He had time enough to think about it, or the reaction of the public has changed his perspective of it. You can show me anything you want. There's no way you can convince me he wasn't an asshole.
Right.
So I guess my question out of all that is, Byron, what type of effect overall do you think this Detroit Pistons Bad Boys team had on Michael Jordan?
I mean, ultimately, they pushed him to another level within basketball. I mean, you saw it. He put on, 15, 20 pounds of muscle in one off season. He just turned himself into a beast, so that regardless of what happened, he could bounce back and keep pushing through it and not respond. He took himself and his teammates to another level, and they ultimately climbed that mountain and got to the next level and became champions.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this. If you had to put your take on it, what were your overall thoughts on that Bad Boys, blue collar, little rough and tenacious style of play? Do you think that's something the people of Detroit are yearning for to return? Is that something the NBA needs again to add to the drama? What are your thoughts?
No, that's not today's NBA. It won't fit in. We've got a ticky-tack league now. No one would ever get away with that in today's NBA. But in that era, they fit in. They weren't the only people doing that. They just got – that was just labeled as the Bad Boys, and they owned it. So, in my opinion, I think, in their era, they were almost 3-time champions. I think they went to either 4 or 5 straight Eastern Conference finals. So, I mean, hard-nosed team, and they ultimately are often forgot in history based on the Celtics, the Lakers, and the Bulls. But they too were champions in that era and fought through all those teams to become champions.
Absolutely. And if we had Stretch on the podcast right now, he'd be singing all the praises of the Bad Boys, because I hear from him daily. how the Bad Boys are the greatest team ever and how they would beat the Warriors, beat some of LeBron's Heat teams, and it goes on and on and on. But that'll be a topic. That'll be a topic for another day.
Yeah, I can't wait for that guy to get on. I watched some Bill Lambier highlights. He's the only 7-footer I know from that time that had zero highlights of him scoring in the paint. Nothing but the guy hoisting up threes. Like, what are you talking about, man? The guy, he probably hit a career like 100 threes, and they had 7 of them in his highlight reel.
Oh, goodness. Well, let's switch up gears here, Byron. Let's talk about the NFL draft that was conducted last weekend. I know we're going to dive in more later with Detroit news writer Eric Coughlin about the Lions and their performance throughout the draft, but let's talk about the league as a whole at this point. So you want to kick that off for us?
Yeah, Mike. So I'd just like to give a quick I'll talk through what really stood out to me. I'll speak specifically to the first round. The biggest surprise to me, actually, and that was through all 7 rounds, was the Packers drafting of Jordan Love.
I was absolutely dumbfounded when that happened.
Makes zero sense. Like, that's, in my opinion, that makes zero sense. You've got Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, he's getting older, but it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, they need skilled players on the outside. Like, I saw a stat today that said Aaron Rodgers has thrown 1 touchdown pass to a first-round receiver. So he hasn't played with many first-round receivers.
Right. If you take the fact that he's been drafted as the heir apparent to Aaron Rodgers and you push that over to the side, one thing that was also really interesting to me was this team under Matt LaFleur is a run-first, defensively built team. And you go out in the first round in one of the deepest drafts talent-wise that we've seen in a long time, and you draft a project quarterback. You don't draft someone on defense to help you get better. You don't draft someone along the line on the offensive side of the ball to protect Aaron Rodgers. You don't get him that weapon on the outside that he needs when there was a multitude of wide receivers available, even in the later rounds. You go out and you get a guy with a ton of question marks who also happened to lead college football in interceptions last season. Now, which really leaves me scratching my head because one of Aaron Rodgers' calling cards is the fact that he protects the ball so well. And you know as well as I do, in the modern NFL, the game is won and lost not only in the trenches, but in the turnover battle.
Absolutely. That's huge, especially when you're a team that wants to run the ball. The last thing you want is someone that's turning the ball over, taking away opportunities to kill that clock.
Right.
So, I mean, everything about that pick just makes me question everything about the new front office and coaching staff of the Packers, which actually makes me a little bit happy based on what they did versus what other teams in the division did, specifically the Detroit Lions. But as you said, we'll get into that with Eric Coughlin a little bit later.
Right. It's a little too early right now to be a fanboy. But let me ask you this, Byron. Are you at all surprised? Because I'm not. This is something we've seen the Packers do with Brett Favre. You know, there were those reported issues with former head coach Mike McCarthy a little over a year ago. He's moved on. He's with the Dallas Cowboys now. Does this say something about Aaron Rodgers that maybe the mass public doesn't know?
Well, I know that it's been reported that Aaron Rodgers is hard to coach. He's not a very coachable guy, and I know that he and Matt LaFleur, there were reports coming out of training camp last year that he and Matt LaFleur were not exactly seeing eye to eye on how they were running the offense. Aaron wants to put the ball up in the air but Matt LaFleur, as you stated, wants to ground and pound. So they kind of have clashing mentality. So I thought they may have figured it out because they went to, the NFC Championship game. Did they not? Wasn't that? Yeah. They went to the NFC Championship game against the 49ers. So in my opinion, I honestly thought they had moved past it, and they were like, coming out of that game, we need more skill players on the outside. But obviously, that's not the case. So they must plan to move into a new direction in the next couple of years, because you don't draft in today's NFL, you don't draft a quarterback and sit him on the bench for 3 seasons. I'm thinking this is a 1 to 2 year area we're working with before Aaron Rodgers is no longer a Green Bay Packer.
Right, I completely agree with you. Obviously, the writing is on the wall. Let's move from the NFC North to the AFC North. The big news coming out of there was the Baltimore Ravens and their performance in the draft. They essentially hit a home run, it seems like, in almost every round with their picks. The most notable one to me standing out was the fact they nabbed running back J.K. Dobbins from Ohio State so late in the second round. Byron, what were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was a bit surprised that he fell like he did. I thought there were a lot of teams ahead of them that could have utilized a running back like a J.K. Dobbins. But, hey, Mark Ingram's no spring chicken. They need another guy there in Baltimore, so the rich get richer, right? And they got themselves a steal in the first round as well, drafting that linebacker out of LSU.
I'm going to be honest with you. Between J.K. Dobbins, Mark Ingram, and Lamar Jackson, this team is going to be incredibly difficult to stop in the run game on a week-to-week basis. A lot of times what you see during a football game, if a team doesn't have a reliable second back, is you see their running back who tends to wear out over the course of the game. You essentially have three guys capable of hitting a home run at any point, and these guys are going to be fresh and healthy going into the third and fourth quarter. It's going to be really dynamic and really interesting to see.
Absolutely, Mike. Agree 100%. What else was a surprise to you, Mike?
One of the things that surprised me is the fall of CeeDee Lamb and how he was able to land with the Dallas Cowboys. Jerry Jones essentially was out there on a yacht with his son and his wife with no incoming lines from the scouting department. And
Yeah.
Jerry Jones makes a big move, and he goes out and he nabs CeeDee Lamb, the biggest after the catch producer in the NFL draft, and adds it to an already potent passing offense that was near the top of the league last year. I think from a personnel standpoint, the Dallas Cowboys are going to be flinging the ball all over the place this year, despite the fact that they still have one of the best running backs in the league in Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised to see both he and Jerry Jeudy fall as late as they did. And I was surprised that I was just surprised at how the receivers were drafted coming through the first round. I really thought that Jerry Jeudy would be the first to go. His teammate Ruggs ultimately ended up being the first one to go. So just some surprises from the receiving core in this NFL draft. And then, I would have thought that the Packers would trade up and grab a CeeDee Lamb or grab themselves a Jerry Jeudy based on how far those guys had fallen. But ultimately, they did not. And the Cowboys were able to get themselves a steal. They actually drafted him right before the Eagles were able to get him. So even better move for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And since we're already in the NFC East and we just mentioned the Eagles, what about the fact that the Eagles went out and drafted Jalen Hurts? I mean, this is a quarterback who definitely has a lot of upside and there's a lot of things to like about him. But at the same time, they've just a few years ago guaranteed their starter, Carson Wentz, over $100 million. What does this say about the Eagles and where they're at this point in time, Byron? And what type of effect do you think this is going to have on Carson Wentz?
Yeah, that was another head scratcher there, Mike. Not sure what they're doing there. I think maybe they drafted him to push Carson Wentz a little bit and maybe for a bit of security based on the health of Carson Wentz throughout his career. I believe last year was the first season outside of his rookie season where he made it through every single game.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Byron. I think this move is completely made to not only push Carson Wentz to get him to take it up to that next level, but also to provide some security in the event that he's injured. Because as you know, he's missed a lot of time over the past few years. This is someone who's supposed to be the Eagles franchise quarterback, but really at this point, you're at a crossroads of whether or not he's actually going to turn into a franchise liability. So you make this move, you bring in Jalen Hurts, somebody who is very heralded in the college football ranks, a guy that's seen success not only at Alabama as a national champion, but also at Oklahoma, a guy who's improved every single year, a guy who is very strong, both mentally and physically, and adds a lot of intangibles to your team and is a dynamic leader. I think this is absolutely a move that the Eagles are saying, hey, we got to figure out what we have with Carson Wentz because we're running out of time.
Agreed, Mike. What else? You got one more for me?
I had one
surprise?
more. I didn't want
Let's
to
do it.
dive. I didn't want to dive too deep into it. I thought the New England Patriots had a very forgettable draft. Bill Belichick isn't necessarily known for his ability to hit in the draft or draft a lot of impact players, and they were very pedestrian in the 3-day event. They didn't go out and get a quarterback. At one point, they even drafted a kicker instead of filling other needs. For me, really, it all signs point to the New England Patriots at this point trying to tank in order to, garner a lot of high picks in next year's draft. What were your thoughts?
I think that's an interesting take. I don't think they drafted very many high-profile guys, but that's not the Patriots' MO. They get guys that kind of fit what they want to do and fit Bill Belichick's system. He got himself a very skilled pass rusher out of Michigan in Uchi. He got himself another pass rusher from the Division II level. Or no, what was that? What was he, a safety?
He may have been a linebacker.
Yeah,
I'm
I
not
don't
sure.
know. Yeah,
Was that guy?
but
Was that the guy he was out there testing in the rain a few months ago?
yes, yep,
He did end up going and
yeah,
getting him.
yeah. He went and got him in the second round, I believe. So, yeah, I mean, I thought they got things that addressed what they needed. They moved on from Goskowski, got themselves a new kicker. He's quick to move on from special teams, even if they're legends. You saw what they did with
Adam
who's the guy that
Vinatieri.
kicked off Vinatieri. Yes, so he's quick to move on from guys. He doesn't. There's no strings attached with Bill Belichick. The only thing that he didn't address, to your point, was the quarterback position. But I thought he went and attacked a lot of their other needs.
Here's the thing, about Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots this year. The reason why, I mean, obviously you're going to go in the draft and you're going to try to fill some needs, but the reason why I suggested that they're tanking is because this year fiscally to compete, on a playoff level for that team is going to be extremely difficult. They don't have a lot of help at the wide receiver position. We saw that last year. And what they have right now is a ton of dead money on the books for guys, with contracts on guys like specifically Tom Brady. And that's going to really inhibit them from being able to go out and get more marquee free agents or names. They're going to help this football team this season.
Yeah, I mean the free agency thing is pretty much done with for them. They don't have any. They don't have any cap space.
Right.
That's why you saw
And
them
that's what I
trade.
was alluding to.
Yeah, I mean, they traded out of the first round so that they didn't have to take on that large cap hit from the first round pick. So they were absolutely being fiscally responsible. But you also have to remember they re upped on pretty much all of their defensive players that were impact players a year ago. So I think that defense is still going to be stellar. I can't really see them tanking based on them spending that money to bring those players back. They could have easily let them go and truly went all in on the tank. So that's why I don't think it's going to be a tanking. I think they'll likely be in contention for that AFC East title.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to take a break here. When we come back, we're going to talk with Detroit News sports writer Eric Coughlin, and we're going to get his take on the University of Michigan football program and the current state of Jim Harbaugh's program, and also his thoughts on the Lions' performance in the 2020 NFL Draft. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Front Porch Tailgate podcast.